All right. So if this is the first time that you are attending our seminar series or any of our events, CHI MNL, or in long form, we are the Manila ACM SIGCHI Chapter, professional chapter. We are one of the local chapters of ACM in the Philippines, and right now we are one of the remaining active local chapters, professional chapters in the Philippines under ACM. Okay, so CHI in the name stands for computer-human interaction, or in computer science, it's what we commonly call human-computer interaction. Okay, so SIGCHI or ACM SIGCHI is a special interest group for HCI. Okay, so we have that course in the CS curriculum, and we are a group of HCI educators, HCI researchers, okay, whose aim is to promote HCI education, improve HCI education in the Philippines, and spur HCI research in many of our local universities. Okay, so that we can grow the HCI local community and get some of the people from the Philippines out into the global scene para mas makilala pa yung mga HCI researchers na ginagawa natin, and especially for our panel today, some teaching innovations when it comes to teaching HCI in our classrooms. Okay, so the title of our session today is a panel on HCI education in the Philippines. So I hope you are you are ready to hear how some of the educators that we have invited today, okay, implement and or teach human-computer interaction in their respective schools. Okay, so our order of presentation will be as follows. So we will begin with Tony Jan Montserrat from University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He will be followed by Miss Beverly, and then Austin Fernandez, Miss Beverly Bravo from Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Muntinlupa, and then Austin Fernandez from De La Salle University, and lastly, Doc Jen Casano from Ateneo de Manila University. So they will be sharing their course designs, teaching innovations, maybe some challenges when it comes to teaching HCI for around 10 minutes. Okay, and they will be doing it in magkakasunod. Okay, so walang breaks in between. Okay, and then after their presentations, we will have a 15-minute health break, so you can get some snacks or maybe grab a bite for your dinner, or maybe drink some water or stretch. And then after 15 minutes, we'll go back into the session, and then we will start the panel discussion. So there we will be they will be responding to some of your questions. I will be asking them questions as well, just to drive the conversation. And hopefully at the end of our session for today, the panel members will get to learn, okay, something from the audience, and then the audience will get to learn something from the panel when it comes to teaching HCI in classrooms. And I hope we have some fellow educators today. Meron po ba dito mga professors sa ating call today? Or mga nagtuturo ng HCI, maybe in the industry. Meron po ba maybe some raise of hands? May mga teachers po ba tayo? Senior high or maybe sa college? Ayan, so meron. Si Miss Christine, ayan, si Sir John. All right. So I hope we get, if you know other professors or instructors from your institution who might be interested in listening to how these panel members teach HCI in their classrooms, please invite them today. May time pa naman to actually join us. Okay, so we'll end around 7:45. So may time pa. Okay, sige. So maybe we can start with our first panel member, PJ.
Hello, good evening. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Thank you. For me on my end, I'm teaching the introduction to human computer interaction in UPLB. And so in terms of the content of my class, it would be around these parts though. So next slide please. So the question is what would be the focus, because HCI is really really big, and given that I've also done some research on HCI, it's really hard to know what to focus on. So what I did here is to start with my experience on HCI, which is when I started HCI. Next slide. When I started learning about HCI, the professor that taught me about it started with this really simple fact that it's a study between people and computers, and eventually, next slide, it's either you study the people that use the computers, you study the behavior, or next slide, you study the computers that benefits the people that are using it. Later on, we after reading a lot more references about HCI, there's this three pegs in a sense about HCI. Next slide, which is about people using computers to be able to do the tasks that they are doing. So I'm revolving around this idea that we do a study within this three parts of HCI. And next slide. So the focus would on my class would always be we start with being able to frame the problem that they are given, usually using contextual inquiries to be able to practice how they ask people. Oops, what happened? Um, mhm. Brian, something happened on the screen.
Yeah, sorry. Sige, you
It's all right.
continue talking. I'll bring it.
So on this end, I start with the focusing of the or framing the problem with using contextual inquiry as one of the tools, and then prototyping using high fidelity prototyping so that they can already um, flesh out the solution that they want to use to solve the problem that they are given, and then be able to also practice how to design an experiment and use it for getting the data from the users via user testing, and then have a proper data analysis using the usual statistical methods that we already have. The thing is on in UPLB, one of the prerequisites that we have is understanding statistics. So they already have some basic knowledge about the statistical methods that they have. So data analysis is sort of something that I added here. So next slide, just to skim through the usual goals for framing the problem is to understand the problem from the target user's point of view. And one of the tools that we are using or we will be using here is contextual inquiry. So either interviews or master apprentice activities, which in a sense they follow the user while the user is doing the tasks involved. And then from there, next slide, we do they create a prototype to be able to create high level solution for the user to test. So either they use storyboards or interactive apps where they don't need to really code. The thing is they need to flesh out the idea or solution so that it can be tested by the users, and then either use a if there's a need to automate something, they use a Wizard of Oz kind of study, where the user pretends, or another sort of uh, the team would uh, sort of pretend to be the computer that does the computation in itself, useful for, let's say, chat systems or things that are similar to that effect. And then next slide. After that is they do the experimental design and testing, which they will need to have a hypothesis and the measurements that need to measure what makes their solution work, and what will be the design the experiment be, if it is within subject or between subject design. Then last is, of course, the next slide. The last is the data analysis part, which is after gathering the data, how do they make sense of the data, and what do we need to learn? Because in essence, HCI, regardless if your hypothesis um is true or false, or if it's successful or failure, you always learn something from it, and that is what a contribution HCI is, so that other researchers can follow through. So in essence, that's my but the gist of how I teach HCI. Yes.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, TJ.
Thanks.
Well within the 10 minutes. Sige, so if you have questions about TJ's presentation, anything about the specifics of his course design, you can send them in the chat. Okay, and then we'll try to answer them later after everyone has presented. Okay, sige. So our next presenter, so let me just stop sharing. Okay. Sige. So our next presenter is Miss Beverly Bravo. So she is an instructor and researcher and a disability rights advocate focusing on technology and digital accessibility. She teaches fundamentals of ICT and web technologies to undergraduate students at the local University of Muntinlupa. She's also a postgraduate student taking up a master's in information technology and working towards research on web accessibility. She volunteers as a researcher at User Experience Philippines to know more about the field closest to accessibility and universal design. As a disabled person herself, she advocates for digital accessibility through speaking to different organizations and communities about the impact of accessibility on the digital space. Okay, so let us all welcome Miss Beverly Bravo. So I will just put you on spotlight and I will start sharing. Ayan.
Okay. So hello everyone. I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. So hello, happy Tuesday everyone. So today I'll be going through the teaching methodologies we use in the Pamantasan. So next slide please. So these three are what I'm going to cover for today: teaching HCI, how we integrate digital accessibility in HCI, and the lessons we've learned with this journey of teaching HCI. So next slide, please. So we started integrating HCI first because of the CHED memorandum that we should include HCI in BS Computer Science curriculum. We started it last 2016 in the 2016 curriculum, but we offer this course to third year BSIT and BS Computer Science students. So some of their prerequisites are all fundamentals of programming basically, and statistics. So next slide, please. Okay, so how do we teach HCI in PL1? Next slide. Okay, so first we define the scope of the course. So as TJ mentioned earlier, HCI is such a broad topic to discuss. A whole semester isn't really enough to discuss all of the aspects of HCI. So we focus on these four things. First is the principles, of course, the basics, principle of human-computer interaction. We've also focused on user experience design that includes research, UI development. We also focus on prototyping and um, user user testing. Because as mentioned earlier, um, many of the prerequisites or the course that have been taken by our third year students are all fundamentals of programming. So we expect that they are pretty established, at least the fundamentals of programming. So we don't want to stray away from the software development. So that's why on the right side of the screen, you can see our main reference book. But of course, this is just one of the books that we use, but we also got references from other authors and from other researchers so we can get more insights. Next slide, please. So these are some of the teaching methodologies that we use. What we want to um, achieve in the pamantasan is the balance between theory and application. So we use lecture, participative discussion. We also review researches and, of course, application. Next slide, please. So this is basically the process or some of the activities within the course. First is we emphasize on empathy building because one of the factors of human-computer interaction is the human factor. So we want our students to be able to empathize with the user. So that's why we do like video showing, storytelling on the different types of people. We introduce the idea of diversity. I know it's such a buzzword for diversity and inclusion. So we try to introduce diversity in the class. So that they would be able to recognize that users are um, different from each other. So they really have to um, emphasize or focus on user research. And when it comes to UI development, so we do rapid testing, prototyping, so they can get initial feedback from their users. So the process here is we'll let students choose a problem that they want to solve. It should be one of their interests, so it would be fun for them. So they do user testing, and then they develop based on the results of the research of identifying the pain points of their intended users. They develop a prototype software. We use VB.NET for in development because that's one of their previous subjects. So um, we chose that. And yeah, user testing after they seek feedback from their users and apply the necessary changes. So next slide, please. So here, as mentioned earlier, my specialization is digital accessibility. So I try to introduce this topic um, for my students. That's why we introduce diversity, the idea of diversity in class. So actually, we started last year. We held this like 2 or 3 hours webinar where I serve as speaker for all third year students because one of the topics also under HCI is universal design. So we wanted to also break the stigma of digital accessibility that it's just for persons with disabilities. We do that through defining disability in a more accurate way, and with that, um, eliminating all the barriers that causes inaccessibility in websites. So next slide, please. So we do that by defining disability in this way. So people are disabled more so by the environment um, than the impairment itself. So on the right side of the screen, you can also see a model that came from the Microsoft Accessibility Toolkit. So you can it's publicly available, so you can check it out actually. So we can categorize disability in three ways. We have temporary, we have situational, and we have permanent. So looking at disability in this way, we can infer that every one of us at some point in our life could be disabled. So meaning digital accessibility is for all. So yeah, next slide, please. Yeah. So along the way, we've learned a lot of lessons in teaching HCI. One is to be flexible, especially during the onset of the pandemic. So our students cannot go outside to do um, user interviews or um, explore the community itself. So we explore other venues using teleconferencing applications, using different tools that they can collaborate. So it's just really a matter of being flexible, adjusting to the current situation, and to keep it interactive. Actually, we're still improving the course design and the methodologies that we use based on the feedback of our students and also on the products that they produce because they're third year students. So fourth year on their final year they produce thesis. So we really want to see results based on the products or services that they produce through their capstone project or through their thesis. So that's basically how we teach HCI in Pilmon. Oh, next slide. Yeah, that's my last slide. So that's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you very much, Beverly. Okay, so let's give her a round of applause. Okay. So our next presenter is Austin. Okay, Austin Fernandez.
Hi.
Ayan. Wait lang.
Okay na.
Okay, sige. So
Okay.
wait lang. Okay, so our next panel member is Ryan Austin Fernandez. He is a faculty member. Let me just put you on spotlight. Okay, so he's an assistant professor at De La Salle University, and he mainly handles courses related to algorithms, theory of computation, and human-computer interaction. His research interests include building machine learning models on various art media, and he's currently working on his dissertation where he leverages these previous research projects to help people with their daily anxiety, to help people deal with their daily anxiety through art or some other means. It's in its early stages, but his approach to finding solutions uses techniques in human-centered design. Okay, so in his free time, he plays games, watches films, read books, and runs a Dungeon and Dragons game. Okay, sige. So our next presenter is Ryan Austin Fernandez. So you may start.
Hi. So I've been teaching in LaSalle for around 2.5 years now, but last term was actually the first time I was able to go a bit outside my comfort zone and handle something not related to algorithms. So like Brian mentioned, I usually handle algorithms related courses, but he gave me the opportunity to teach HCI for the first time. That's why the slides are entitled from this perspective of a first timer, because well, in terms of HCI, this was my first time teaching the course. So next slide, please. Okay, oops, sobra. Okay, so I'm going to go for a more specific and bit by bit approach to discussing how I approach this because, well, what do you call this? It's my first time. So I'd like to focus on specific techniques I used on each of the major topics that we covered. So we'll just walk through it in chronological order, siguro. But as a brief overview, this course design was based on yung design nila Brian and Jordan from previous iterations of the course. I made it a little bit my own, but for the most part, the outline, the learning plan was retained naman. And we focused on, as usual for HCI, group project outputs and feedback. The feedback loop for me is a very important thing in this subject. So their major outputs, the students gave us a need finding study prototype checkpoints. I checked on their progress every now and then for their final prototype. And of course, their final prototype and a presentation of their design journey. Okay, next slide, please. So here's our walkthrough. So at the start, we discussed the design process. And the way I sort of leveraged this topic was as a sort of teaser or trailer for the entire course, because I'm pretty sure most of you are familiar with the idea shopping cart video. It really is sort of indicative of everything that's being discussed in an introductory course to HCI. So I really, this also was the way I introduced how interactive I intended the course to be, because I really let the students figure out the design process on their own through the video. So as I was playing the video, I was just asking them, okay, what are they doing here? What are they doing there? And eventually they actually came up with the design process on their own just by identifying through their own words what the people in the team were doing. And that's going to be a through line of the course. I believe very much in active learning, or the pedagogical term is drifting away from me right now. But I prefer it when I let my students figure things out on their own. So I usually deliver the base lecture, but the major insights I want them to come up with on their own. With my help, as much as possible, they come up with it on their own. So next slide, please. So now we're getting into the need finding now. And after I discuss the basics, contextual inquiry, the usual things we discussed here, generate or designing your research questions, your methodology, I actually had them do kaagad a very micro or minute version of a need finding study. So usually their class exercises after or immediately after the lecture aren't intended to represent the actual activity. That's their project's purpose. But generally have them do something very similar, but on a much smaller scale. So in this case, for example, we just chose a very common problem, like for example, commuting, or finding a place to eat for a night out with your friends. And we had them essentially focus on that small problem that most people in the class could possibly relate to, and then they would collect data about that. So in the way, the learnings from the lecture, I am again reinforcing the fact that they can apply it directly after, and I can give them feedback on how they conducted their minute study. Of course, it's not a formal study, but if I can, my philosophy is if I can correct the mistakes in that small version of the conduct of a study, it may help in trickling up to the larger version of the activity, which is what they did for their projects. Next slide, please. This led to their first major output now, where they now have to propose a sort of problem domain. So wala pang actual problem statement dito. They're actually just picking something that they can relate to, something that they do often, And through their need finding study, they actually come up with their focused design problem, a very specific thing that they want to solve within that domain. So a few notable examples now is a lot of them experience getting lost in malls. So they want to make a pathfinder for malls, matchmaking service for artists and art commissioners. So the other examples here, trial simulation for custom keyboard builders. So yung mga gumagawa ng custom keyboards, they want to see what their build is going to look like beforehand, something like that. And maintaining student physical or mental wellness during online classes. These are things that I think you can imagine students have some experience with, especially CS students. And I could feel the passion of my students when they presented their outputs. Next slide, please. So we're getting to the second half of the course now, and we got the ideation. And what I did here was really establish the kind of mindset I want them to have when they're ideating their ideas for or after their need finding study. So we did a little activity here, which I'll actually show you a little glimpse of the activity. Next slide, please. So the activity is essentially a brainstorming session, but they're given 30 seconds to really improvise a very simple product pitch. I'm not going to read everything. You can see it naman. But I give them a very random problem. And really, this is manic improvisation on their part. So it's a group project. It's a group activity. So, but they can't really coordinate a unified vision of the product beforehand. So my goal here is a bit multifold here. But let's say an example problem I gave them is help. I can't wake up in the morning. My alarm goes off and I still can't wake up. So problems like that are kind of silly, but the students had a lot of fun trying to come up with creative solutions to those kinds of problems. Next slide, please. This is where I implied or sort of gave some modifiers, where now they had to present their pitch with some weird modifier. And very few groups went with the first one because, I don't know, hirap sila sa dire-diretsong Filipino. But essentially, next slide, please. Wait lang. Actually, I think I removed that slide. I'm just gonna talk about it. My intent for these two factors, no, the improvisation of their pitch and the modifiers, is twofold. So the improvisation really is to encourage them to just come up with what first comes to mind. Okay, focus on ideas and not filtering the ideas right away. And the modifiers really force them to work somewhat within some constraints. Like they can't just go all out. They're forced to rein something in or work within a certain framework. So that's the kind of mindset I wanted to instill with after the lecture on brainstorming. I wanted them to get used to thinking outside the box, but eventually having to rein it in with some constraints. Next slide, please. So we're almost at the end here, and this is where we discussed prototyping products, and they were able to sort of compare and contrast serial versus parallel prototyping by designing a chair for online learning. So essentially, it's a group activity again emphasizing my focus on doing-based learning by doing. And half the team did serial prototyping, whereas the other half, they made multiple prototypes and they merged the best parts of it. And I asked them to compare sort of the progression of their prototypes. This is an activity that I borrowed from the previous iterations of the course. Next slide, please. Now, this is around the time when, there we go. These three topics, unfortunately, were hit during the suspension ni Mayor Isko and all of the Omicron spikes. So most of these were sort of asynchronous activities, and I wasn't able to really focus on the learning by doing philosophy that I've been employing for most of the course now. So it caused several problems, especially with the evaluation portion or the usability testing portion, because in their prototype checkpoints, I noticed a lot of the groups kind of sumablay sila in terms of like having well-defined tasks that they would ask their users to do. Some of them actually just let users play around, but they don't have set tasks or specific questions that they wanted answered through each usability test iteration. So I guess that's a shortcoming on my end, because we didn't do much of those things we did in the previous topics that they were able to learn by doing right after the lecture. Next slide, please. And then the last part was our ethics section. So ethics about design. And I gave them three main questions to ponder about when it comes to sort of innovative designs. And that's the first thing is, if it's not them that came up with it, can they identify what problem does this tech aim to solve? What considerations should you consider across all aspects, medical, no, legal, all that jazz? And number three is, what are unintended or negative side effects that this technology can have? And our case study here were actually Black Mirror episodes from previous iterations. So if you're familiar with some episodes, there's one where you can record everything that you see, no, and save it into a chip into your neck. So episodes like that, we applied this framework, and I really forced my students. It was a very interactive discussion where they were able to sort of. I let them mainly carry the discussion, and I just responded and gave feedback to their responses, saying, "Did you consider this?" or "That's a really good insight." And really, this was probably my favorite session because I saw the creativity and the sort of critical thinking of my students the most in this session. Next slide, please. I do believe that's. I think there's one more. So after that, I asked them to make their own Black Mirror episode. So they start with a problem, okay, which is what I've been stressing for the entire term. Really, you start with a problem, you come up with a solution, but this time we focus on the ethics of their solution, things to consider, side effects, and I asked them to write a story that highlights bad effects of the initial version of their tech. But now that they've come up with this sort of narrative of a possible bad outcome of their technology, can they actually improve it in terms of design? And I wasn't able to. I didn't have time to compile the best examples, no, and I don't think I have enough time to discuss them at any point. But at any rate, but I was very happy with the outcome of this output. They showed the outcomes I wanted them to get from the topic. Next slide, please. I think that might be it. Yeah, final prototypes and chat. So despite some problems with the checkpoints, like their testing had some problems, they were able to fix this come by the final prototype. So yeah, again, I didn't have enough time to compile like the best, and I only have 10 minutes, so I think I'm actually nearing my time limit. But I believe that's the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. I think thank you, slide na to. Yeah, that's my intent. I just went through step by step what I went through the course, each topic, and the major activities that I did. But to summarize, my main point here for my students was I wanted them to do a kind of tiny or a simplified version of what I taught that day. Because personally for me, I tend to lose knowledge that I gain just by watching YouTube videos or lectures or online courses. I retain knowledge the most when I apply it, especially right away. And I wanted to sort of help the students in case they learn the same way as I did. They did something very related to the topic at hand immediately, even if it's not exactly what they should be doing. At least they get their hands wet, to use an idiom, with regard to the topic that we just discussed, so that pagdating dun sa project, they have a sort of idea on what it's supposed to feel or at least look like. Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
All right, thank you very much, Austin, for sharing our course design for human-computer interaction at De La Salle University. Okay, so now we're down to our last panel member for tonight, and after her, we will have a 15-minute health break. Okay, so our next speaker, so let me just share the screen first. Okay, ayan, sige. So our next panel member is Dr. Jeneline Casano. Okay, so she is an assistant professor of the Department of Information Systems and Computer Science at the Ateneo de Manila University. So she is also a member of the Ateneo Laboratory for the Learning Sciences. Her areas of interest include human-computer interaction, game-based learning, and gamification in education. So let's hear from Doc Jen, okay, as to how they teach human-computer interaction at the Ateneo. Okay, so Doc Jen, floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you again for allowing me to share how we cover HCI in Ateneo. The course design is highly based on the course design of my previous professor when I took the course when I was taking my PhD. So allow me, the flow essentially of my presentation will start with the content that we cover. And then I proceed to some of the assessment activities that we give to our students, and then some resources that we use as references for the course and the course design in general. Next slide, please. For this one, I'm giving here a snapshot of the topics that we cover pre-pandemic. And as it has been mentioned earlier, HCI is a very broad area, and so the challenge really is to pick the topics that you will cover for a one semester course. And so Before the pandemic, these are usually the topics that we cover. We often start with human computer interaction, the limitations and the capabilities of both the human and the computer, and how we bridge these gaps between the two. And then common to the other course designs of the previous speakers, there's a project wherein they will put into application the concepts that they have learned from all these topics. During the pandemic, next slide, please. The challenge was we had to consciously reduce the content because of the limitations of the online learning setup. And additionally, in Ateneo, there was a mandate that during the pandemic years, we try to limit the learning hours for a 3-unit course to 48 to 60 learning hours. And so that was a big challenge for all courses, I would say. And so we had to consciously identify what topics we will cover. And so we went with the foundational concepts. We still discussed, of course, limitations of humans, limitations and capabilities of humans and computers, and then the psychology of everyday things. We often start with this. We look at everyday things, their affordances, what their intentions are, and our own perceptions of what good or bad design look like. And then we move into user-centered design, wherein we discuss how this entire design process can be executed. What are the methods involved in this process? We start with user research and getting to know the users or your target respondents. And then we present the students with some design stories with focus on the methodology as to how a product was designed. And then we look into certain design rules, guidelines, principles, and then usability testing. And specifically during the pandemic, we focused on remote usability testing. How can we conduct usability tests from long distance when the team and the respondents are not in the same location? And then we usually end the course with some HCI grand challenges and outstanding questions that are very much open for research in the field of human computer interaction. Next slide, please. Um, in terms of assessment, I usually give individual work and then group work. For the individual activities, these are sample of the assignments that I give them. I usually start the individual assignments with tasks that will allow them to reflect on, again, the environment. Next slide, please. For example, the first one, bad design choices. In this particular assignment, I asked them to pick an everyday thing in their possession, but it the thing should not be a computer of any kind, meaning it doesn't have it needs to be something that does not have a microchip. And I asked them to take a picture of it and explain what the object is, explain what the intention, what is the object supposed to provide, what's the affordance of the object, and then explain why they think the object represents bad design. How does the design of the object fail to provide the intended use for that object? Another example of an assignment, next slide, please. When we shifted to online, we gave this is actually an assignment designed by my co-teacher, Dr. Edith Rodrigo, wherein we asked them to compare the affordances of the face-to-face setup versus the online learning setup. So we ask the students to reflect on what are the things that they can do easily in a face-to-face setup that became a lot more challenging when we had to shift to online. And then what are the things that we can easily do online but were quite challenging in a face-to-face setup. And so this forced them to pay attention to the things around them and to the design of these things that they use every day as they work on their daily tasks. Next slide, please. Towards the end of the course, the individual assignments transition into reading assignments wherein we give them papers, published papers on HCI related work. So they are exposed to what researchers in the community are doing, what are the methodologies being used in HCI research, and what's the current state of the technology. So in this example, I asked them to read the paper titled The Dark Pattern Side of UX Design, which is a very interesting paper that explores the ethical concerns that come into play when we design product when companies design products that they want consumers to consume. Next slide, please. And then this is the big part of the assessment, which is a group project. And we divide it into three parts. The first one, they start off with a user research, and then they proceed to designing for users. And then the last one is a usability testing. Next slide, please. For the first part, the students are asked to identify a domain that they would like to focus on, a context that they would like to focus on. And after which, next please, they identify the target users. And we often ask them to identify a group that is accessible to them so that when they have to do the testing, it will not be a problem for them when they have to invite people. And so they identify target users, they identify a problem in their chosen domain, and then they try to come up with a proposed solution. This time it has to be, the solution could be an app, a website, a system, and they have two choices. They could either design something from scratch or they could propose a redesign of an already existing system. For example, they would like to redesign Instagram or Facebook Messenger. They could do that as well for so long as it's mapped to a particular problem. For so long as the decision to redesign is based on a certain problem that they would like to address. Next, please. The output for the first project is user personas. We ask them to invite, in a more normal setting, we ask them to invite about 5 people from their target respondents. But when we shifted to online, we just ask them to invite at least 2 people because it's a challenging it's a challenging it's challenging because of the limitations of the online platform. But the goal is for them to come up with personas that will represent the needs, the motivations, and the pain points of their target users within the context that they have identified. After which, for project 2, next please, using the data that they have collected, using the user personas and the data that they have collected through the user research, they use this information to identify the needs and the specific pain points of their target users. And the output for this one is that they have to map these pain points with specific design choices or design prescriptions, which they believe will address the pain point. After which, next slide, please. They have to come up with, in our case, we just asked them to produce a low fidelity prototype. At the very least, they could just come up with a paper prototype, a doodle of how they envision the solution would look like. So no coding is necessary for this for HCI, at least in our implementation of the course, because in Ateneo, HCI is offered as an interdisciplinary course open to all students, open to even students who are not computer science. Hence, they may have no programming background. And so for this part, they just have to come up with a low fidelity prototype of their proposed solution. And then last part, for the usability testing, next slide, please. The goal here is to design a usability test, come up with the methodology, the questionnaires that they need, and then collect the data. So using the prototype that they designed, they will invite again at least 5 to 10 people who will give feedback on their design of the proposed solution. And the deliverable is an analysis of the data. They could do simple descriptive statistics depending on the methodology that they adopted and the data that they have collected. And they can do a qualitative presentation of the results of the feedback from the respondents. Next, please. In terms of resources, next slide, please. We often look at conference proceedings. A go-to conference in our lab is the HCI, Human International Conference on Human Computer Interaction. So every year, the lab makes it a goal to make a submission to this conference. And when we have someone who's able to present, they are typically given access to the proceedings of the conference, which is a very good resource for a lot of HCI research done by people all over the world. And apart from that, I also like to look into books. My go-to books are, next slide, please. Don Norman's The Design of Everyday Things is, I believe, a staple in human-computer interaction. The other book that I like to use for this course as a reference lang for the materials that we prepare is Heat Makers by Derek Thompson. And then last, Evil by Design, Nathan Casano, he's also a professor, an instructor from DISCS in Ateneo, prepared this lecture on Evil by Design, which is based on Chris Nodder's book of the same title. So this is one of my favorite parts when I handle HCI. I normally invite Nate to do the lecture in my class wherein he just talks about the book and his take on what companies are doing to persuade us into consuming the products that they produce. It's an interesting book because it's organized by the 7 deadly sins, and it's a fun topic to cover because parang it's not very computer science, it's more of the human side, and at least the goal is to produce awareness in our learners when evil is being used in the context of our day-to-day consumptions. So I guess that's my last slide. I think it's a thank you slide now for the next one. So thank you and good evening.
Sorry, nakamute pala ako. Sorry. Ayun. So thank you very much, Doc Jen. I see a lot of parallelisms between some of the course designs, especially sa DLSU at sa Ateneo, which is interesting because this is the first time that we are meeting you. So, okay. Sige. So now we will now proceed to a 15-minute health break. Okay, so for our attendees, you can stretch a little bit, maybe grab some snacks, some food, drink some water. Okay, sige. So it's already 6:56 on my watch, so we will be back around 7, 7:11. Tama ba ako? Tama. Around 7:11 p.m. Okay, so we'll be back. So please be back by 7:11 p.m. Okay, sige. All right, so it's already 7:10, hindi pa 7, ayan, 7:11 na. So I hope most of you are back. Panelists, if you are already back on your seats, I would like you to open your cameras again because I will be putting you on spotlight. Okay, so thank you. Ayan. So let me just stop sharing. Okay, spotlight, spotlight, add spotlight, spotlight, spotlight. Ayan, sige. So, now that our panelists are back and I hope some of you are also back, okay? So you can start sending your questions kung may mga nakatago man kayong questions dyan, especially for the educators who are with us tonight. Okay, if you have questions about course design sa HCI, like maybe what can we improve or what can we try to implement in our own course designs, you can send them in the chat, or if you have some questions about their course designs, yung mga nag-present today, okay, please send them in the chat. So while we're waiting for those questions, I do have some questions prepared for our panel and it's up to you kung sino yung gustong sumagot. Okay, so my first question to the panel is this one. So hearing your different course designs, hearing the different activities that you give your students to see how they exhibit the skills that they are currently learning in your course. What are your non-negotiable topics? So sabihin natin, pag magka-cut down pa tayo, katulad nung sinabi, nung kinukwento kanina ni Doc Jen, nagka-cut down siya kasi nga due to the pandemic, so we had to reduce the number of contact hours. And that's really challenging for us instructors. So what are your non-negotiable topics, yung never pwedeng matanggal sa course design or activities, okay, in your course design? Sige, anyone could start answering the question. Sige. So just to repeat the question. So what are your non-negotiable topics or activities in your course design?
Yes,
Kahit anong mangyari, kailangan ko ituro to.
I'll try to start.
Sige.
I guess on my end, if it's going to be like trimmed down to the basic necessities, I think yung sinimula na, although I want to think na parang yung design thinking na you start with the problem and then prototyping and then user test, that will be yung kumbaga basic module talaga na meron kasi that teaches a lot of the basic HCI methodologies na, except lang yung may statistics. So even like kunyari mga 2 days, 3 days or even a week of or 5 days worth of activities lang yung pwede. Yun yung the ability for them to practice yung asking questions, understanding the problem, and then formulating the solution from their framed problem, and then testing their solution is already yung basic features. And then parang katulad ng mobile web design na yun yung basic, and then once you have the ability to expand, then you expand from there. So yun yung akin.
So for you, it's very important to cover the basic steps that is usually covered in design thinking. Tama ba?
Yes.
Okay, sige. So other members of the panel, do you have
Hi.
yeah. Yes.
To add to what Sir TJ said, no, I agree with the main steps of design thinking, but I'd like to focus actually on the empathize stage. Kasi ang dami rin topics sa empathize stage, no? There's personas, there's journey mapping, there's empathy maps. Ang dami yan, and I think if there was one non-negotiable artifact for me here, it would be personas. Kasi it's really helpful to be able to visualize who you're designing for, especially if you're at the point that you understand what the problem is or what your specific design problem or focus design problem is. It also helps to sort of think about what type of user you're designing for, and the specific details about this kind of person that you want to help with your solution. So to a bit drill down dun sa empathize stage, I would keep that the most. Of course, no, a lot of them are important, but I think that one is one of the most important because it really helps you focus your solution in the coming steps.
Mhm. And I guess for user persona, I guess that's also one of the most misunderstood and misunderstood uh, tools in HCI. Minsan na nagde-design sila ng user persona sa parang pang-marketing, not really for computing systems, for example. Ayun. Sige. Beverly or Jen, Doc Jen, anything to add? Non-negotiables.
Yeah, I would agree with what Sir Austin and Sir TJ said, especially the empathizing part. I think if there's one thing that I would want my students to learn from an HCI class is that, especially the CS students, is that whenever they design systems, they have to keep the users in mind. And the users are not them. And I think that's something that's quite a little difficult for CS students kasi the courses that they take before taking HCI are very technical courses wherein they focus on systems development, writing the code, and not really having the opportunity to communicate with people who will be using the system. So I do agree that that's a non-negotiable in the course. And in terms of activity, yung application, yung project, siguro if I had to drill to cut more, I would remove the individual assignments and really keep the group project because that will give them a first-hand experience of how they can put into practice the concepts that are being taught even in a very small scale, kahit sa very small sample lang. At least they get the opportunity to talk to people outside of themselves.
Alright, sige. Beverly?
Same with me. I've always emphasized on the empathy building part of the lesson. So that's why we introduce diversity and digital accessibility. So yeah, that's also my non-negotiable.
Alright, sige. So thank you for all of your answers. So we'll just entertain one question from our audience. So how is it difficult and or different to teach HCI in this kind of setting, like yung online? Okay, so what are the pros and cons of teaching online versus face-to-face and vice versa? Ayun. So anyone can answer.
Sige, I think I could start.
Sige.
Siguro pinaka-obvious na is, yun nga, hindi ka pwedeng mag-interview ng face-to-face or in person. Yun yung pinaka-challenging. Noong una, yun yung pinaka-challenging na part. But we were able to overcome it kasi marami namang available na teleconferencing and other tools online that our students can use in interviewing users. Yung isa pang challenge for me would be yung testing part. Actually, yeah, naka-empathize din ako kanina with Sir Austin. Yeah,
Austin.
yung dun sa testing na part. Kasi yun din yung medyo lumaglag nung time na nag-start yung pandemic. So medyo mahirap mag-keep track ng students yung progress din nila and all. Especially dun nga sa testing.
Sige. Others who would like to add to that? Like how difficult or how different was it to teach HCI in this setting?
I'd like to add dun sa sinabi ni Ms. Beverly about testing. I find this was actually something that became a problem for some of their groups though. They had to pivot a little bit into the second half of the course. Kasi I believe the online setting really sort of restricts the type of projects you can pursue for your group project, the application. Kasi for example, back then, for example, when I took the course under you, Brian, I'm not sure if there were some groups that actually tried to prototype like physical technology. Pero that's something you can't do in an online setting as easily, at least. Most of the applications that were being prototyped, at least in this batch, if not all of them, I believe it's actually all of them, are some form of a web or mobile or desktop application, which I don't know. It's just it's sometimes interesting. I haven't experienced it because I wasn't able to teach in a face-to-face setting. But it's interesting kasi to, for example, prototype something physical. Because iba yung that may not be within the scope of the course sometimes, no? But that is somewhat a different experience. Um, and after all, the example I showed to the students at the start of the term is the idea shopping cart. No, so the way that was presented, it's a physical object, it's a shopping cart, and they're still able to apply the concepts taught in class. So I think yun yung major thing. It restricts the type of projects that those students can pursue.
Yeah, I remember when I was teaching, parang may gumagawa pa ng ATM, as in may box talaga sila na ginagawa, na dinadala sa classroom just to demonstrate.
I
Alright,
remember
sige,
nung for the technopreneurship class I took for masters, someone actually tried to prototype fintech, yung parang sa PayMaya. Stuff like that you can't do in this online setting as easily, at least.
Yeah. Sige, so this is a follow-up but related question. So paano nagbago yung quality nung projects ng mga students now that we shifted to online teaching, and they also had limitations with the kind of project. So paano nagbago? May napansin ba kayo nagbago dun sa mga projects nila, maybe in terms of quality? Na-mention na ni Austin yung in terms of the kind of parang solutions na parang nag-stick sila with mobile web that they could maybe prototype using Figma or these other tools. But in terms of quality, may nagbago ba dun sa output nila na online tayo ngayon? Maybe Doc Jen or TJ would like to answer that one.
Siguro in my experience, well, often naman the output, the quality of the output of the students vary. But I think what's quite surprised me is that even though there were challenges to the online setup, there were really good projects pa naman, despite the limitations on the type of proposals that they can work on. Yun nga, very limited to web applications or mobile applications. So the creativity of the students were kind of limited as far as the technology is concerned. But nonetheless, at least in the classes that I have handled, there were groups who had really good projects despite the limitations of the online setup. I guess they were able to maximize the resources that are available, even if the methods are a bit more challenging to execute. Kasi di ba mag-usability test ka, it's very difficult to do it versus doing it face-to-face. But in terms of quality, I would say there were students who were really doing good despite the limitations of delivering the course online.
Right. How about you, TJ? May napansin ka
on
ba?
my end, I cannot really sort of say yung difference kasi although we had HCI course nung pre-pandemic, it's a bit different kasi ano siya, optional siya before. So nagkaroon lang talaga ng formalization ng HCI class nitong pandemic. So ang nangyari is talagang lahat kami online yung yung setup. So yeah, I agree, parang mobile or web-based yung projects, but in terms of like yung setup, they are in essence creative pa rin naman despite the limitations of user testing as well as yung project itself. But the thing is, even with the user testing, they are utilizing, let's say, Google Meet to do the user testing and be able to watch how the users react, mga ganon. So yun.
Yeah. Okay. Sige. So balik rin naman natin yung question. So kanina we're talking about challenges that we had when we shifted to online. With now that we've shifted to online, meron bang pros yung pagiging online? Like never natin siyang nagagawa before nung face-to-face tayo. Siguro pass na dito si TJ kasi sabi niya kanina online lang yung HCI niya. Nag-start siya sa online. So, but for Doc Jen, Beverly, and maybe Austin, may mga nagagawa ba kayo ngayon na hindi nyo kayang gawin before nung face-to-face pa yung classes? Na you think somehow improve the delivery of the course or maybe the kind of projects that your students have?
For me, on my end, siguro yung nakita kong pros sa pagko-conduct ng HCI online is they use more applications to organize things. Notion and other
Yes.
related mas nakakagamit sila kasi before, though manual is still good, di ba, nagsusulat sa yung sticky notes and sa ideation
Yes.
process, pero I think nag-enjoy din sila in using different online tools pagdating sa collaboration. So, yan, mas organized sila and well documented din yung research nila nung na-online na.
Right, so parang na-force sila to actually document everything. Sige. Doc Jen, Austin?
Pero for me, from my perspective as the instructor, I guess I was forced to look into the resources available online more than I used to because siya yung accessible platform right now, right? So I looked at YouTube, what are available, yun nga, online journals, articles. So I think that's something that I explored more when we were forced to shift online versus when we were doing this face-to-face. But I would still prefer the course be delivered in a face-to-face setting or at least hybrid siguro. And siguro nga because it's human-computer interaction, the interaction with the students is really different in face-to-face classes, especially because feedback is very Sir Austin mentioned this earlier, feedback is very important in the deliverables because the students can't just proceed without receiving the feedback from the instructors, and I just find giving feedback in a face-to-face setup a lot more easier compared to doing it in an online setup.
Right, I completely agree with that. I think many of us here would agree na we would still prefer na face-to-face, although we would want to keep some of the tools that we've discovered during this online setting and then maybe integrate it more into our face-to-face activities. Sige. Sige, there's an interesting follow-up question here. So, what topics or methods you use from the online setting would you want to retain once face-to-face comes back? Siguro one or two answers lang from the panel.
Ako, I have to admit, I'm a very lazy teacher. So, once na nagawa ko na kasi yung
Naka-record.
slide or yes, it's all I'm agreeing to this part na please record this part. Pero ang point ko lang kasi is once na nagawa ko na kasi yung slides or the videos, I would like to have them na parang yun yung resources. And then the lectures would be more on talagang discussion na lang on their projects or questions, more on live, more on panel. Itong katulad nito, may question and answer portion. So they have to do yung homework na they watch the videos, then do their projects. Kasi yun nga, parang para sa akin, if I'm going to do the lecture every semester, parang nakakaubos din ng energy kasi yan.
Okay. So basically yung video, yung preparation ng video na pwede nilang panoorin na lang on their own time, that's something that you would like to continue doing. Na kahit face-to-face na, mas gusto mo pa rin na ano. Okay. Sige. Others? Maybe one more answer from the panel.
I well, how do I explain this? When I run my classes, I kind of run it like a Twitch stream. So the students can just drop parang dito, okay? They can just drop questions in the chat, and then I'll just keep going. I'll just keep going, and then if a question comes up, when I reach the end of a sub chapter in the lecture or a section, I can check the chat box and I can just go through the questions. Of course, during face to face, no, they can just raise their hand, but there are some students kasi that are kind of shy. So I want to implement some form of this anonymous question thing. If we go back to face, the students who are a bit more shy, if they're really not willing to ask the question out loud, I hope I could find a way to sort of implement na yung pwede sila. Usually what they do in Zoom is they do a direct message to the professor. So I
Yeah.
can see, only I see that. If there's some way to implement that, that would be something that I'd like to carry over. Kasi that has helped me. The current batch of students I've handled, I haven't handled them in face to face. But so I can't tell you if some of them only speak out or ask these types of questions in an online setting. But I was able to handle a prior batch, my first batch, when I handled 2 terms kasi na face-to-face. And there were some students in that batch na nagtatanong lang on Zoom because they don't have the sort of shyness or the anxiety of getting judged for asking a question by raising their hand in class. So, ayun, to summarize, I want to implement that kind of anonymous question and answer kind of thing to help people who have questions. Actually, they don't need the courage to just raise their hand. Ayan.
All right. Sige. So so my next question to the panel is this one. So if you can improve one thing in your course design right now, what would it be? Kung may gusto man kayong idagdag siguro na topic or activity, ano kaya yun?
Siguro I could start.
Yes.
Nung pre-pandemic, one of the evaluation comments from the students would often come in the form of there's too much lecture. So there's too much talking happening. Kasi di ba the first part really is covering a lot of concepts, design heuristics, user research, and so on and so forth. And then when we shifted to online and we had to cut down on the topics, yung comments naman from the students is that very too much brevity naman in terms of the topics covered. So I think going forward, a challenge for me is to strike the right balance between concept versus the application. And I do I admit that it's a process for me because yun nga, HCI is very broad and picking out the topics that we really want to cover given a very limited period of time is a challenge. So yun siguro I would the question now is what do I add to the current set of topics, perhaps more on the design kasi I don't cover a lot of the very specific design heuristics, and some students are kind of looking for it, yung mga UX principles talaga na what contrasting color should work in these kinds of setups, but I don't cover that anymore in HCI, but perhaps we in future iterations, that's something that we can consider as a supplement to the current list of topics. And as far as pedagogy naman is concerned, siguro yung feedback, I try my best to give feedback promptly to students, but due to life, sometimes feedback gets delayed. So that's something that I still want to improve on kasi yun nga, heavily reliant yung output nila on the feedback that you give to them. So yeah, that's for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, Doc Jen. Sige, maybe one more answer from the panel. Something that you would add or subtract from your list of topics, or maybe activity, pwede ring activity. Kung may mga gusto kayong idagdag na activity na sa tingin nyo would really reinforce a skill or concept?
Mahirap magdagdag ng activity eh. Kasi kapag
Kasi
dagdag
kulang
ako
na nga
ng
oras.
activity, magdagdag ako ng activity, either yung mga students o yung mga co-teachers ko na medyo realistic yung nagrereklamo eh.
Ah,
Parang, sir, parang ang dami na for this kind of semester. Parang ganun. But
mm-mm.
if I would sort of add something, it's sort of parang practice na din, but I would like them to just create a paper out of it. So the ability to write a paper, regardless if it's going to be publishable or hindi, the ability to just report it in such a way na paano nila ginawa yung kanilang project is something that I would have to do. Kasi parang I guess being a reviewer on a lot of conferences and journals lately, that part of practicing how to write a paper and be able to just relay what you did yung dun sa research mo is something that should be practiced, especially sa HCI. And regardless kasi if they're going for the academic research or industry research or even just practical or yung application part ng HCI, the ability to report your findings is something na dapat sana din ma-practice. So ayun, yun yung akin na
Okay. Sige. So thank you TJ, thank you Doc Jen for sharing your thoughts. Sige. Meron pa tong mga questions dito. Let me just check. Okay, sige. Maybe we can have this question. What's the best project you've seen from your students so far? Just one project lang that you would like to share. And if you have some visuals, syempre it would help kung may visuals. Pero kung wala, okay lang naman din. So far, ano yung pinakamaganda, pinaka na-impress kayo?
parang yung silence means wala pa yata kami nakita na No, I mean, it's hard to say kasi
Right.
Especially on my end, pandemic kasi yung start ng aking first HCI class, and then this is my second HCI class. So wala pa talagang parang okay, wow, ganun na kaya mahirap magsabi ng this is something na pwedeng into or talagang exceptional. Mahirap, sorry.
Sige. Maybe si Doc Jen or maybe Beverly would like to share something because I think out of the four of you, sila na rin yung mas matagal nagtuturo ng HCI. Maybe they were exceptional in terms of the final output or exceptional in terms of how they actually work on the process. Maybe in that regard. Ang hirap. Sorry, dapat pala pina-assignment ko tong question na to. Okay lang.
Siguro sa akin, I think I think the impressive projects that I've had encountered so far in my classes are really because of how they executed the methodology and not really the output. Sometimes kasi even if the proposed solution is really very simple, especially nga I gave them the option to redesign an already existing system. The groups that who do very well in terms of designing their methodology, preparing the instruments, presenting their results. So yun ata yung impressive na na-encounter ko so far. Yung ginamit ko kanina dun sa slide na sample, I'm not sure if people
nasa
were able to
Notion.
see it. Yes,
Yeah.
yung nasa Notion. Parang siya yung exemplar so far that I have right now kasi very extensive yung discussion nila what they were able to collect from the users, and you could see that they really, you could see from the output that they did the process. They talked
Mm-mm.
to people, they collected insights and summarized it in such a way that both their group and I will understand what the users are needing in that particular context. So yun ata yung kasi I don't require them to produce a software or an output naman talaga. So it's really the process that I look at, and so far the impressive ones are those who go into specific details when they report their results.
Mm-mm. Sige. My next question is this. Doc Jen, you mentioned earlier that your HCI course in the Ateneo is interdisciplinary. At DLSU, it's not like that. So, puro CS lang talaga, or maybe may ibang majors like computer systems engineering or network and information systems na students. How important do you think um, is your course being interdisciplinary?
I guess because if you look at HCI, yung nature talaga ng field, it's not purely computer science. It has evolved such that a lot of fields come into play within this area. So may psychology na siya, may design, that there's computer science. So I think it's important that I think that the benefit of making it interdisciplinary is that students from various courses, not just computer science, see the value in taking the users into account whenever they design something. It doesn't have to be a computer system. Even if you're designing, kunwari, a poster lang or an advertisement that people will look at, there are HCI principles that come into play. So I think the value in making it interdisciplinary is that we are exposing, and we're exposing people from different fields into this concept that they can use in their own respective research areas, and at the same time you get to put people from different fields in one room, so you
Mm-mm.
can have that conversation outside of your own field lang. So
Mm-mm.
yung mga computer science students namin, they get to hear the perspective of people from, let's say, fine arts and design. So yun ata yung nagiging benefit ng for making it an interdisciplinary course open to not just computer science students.
So may mga BFID rin na students. I see.
Yes.
Ayun. Sige. But for Beverly, sa inyo ba sa PL Moon, interdisciplinary din ba yung HCI course mo?
No,
Oo.
BSIT and CS lang.
Ayun. And so, given na hindi siya interdisciplinary, I guess we can say the same for LB, no? Tama ba? Hindi rin interdisciplinary yung course mo, TJ.
Again, sorry.
Hindi rin interdisciplinary yung course mo.
Hindi.
Okay.
Yeah, hindi.
Sige. So, going back to Beverly, so, given yung need na makuha yung perspective ng ibang fields, paano mo nagagawa na nakukuha na nag-explore sila outside of their CS training or IT training, yung mga students?
Kung outside,
Mm-mm.
usually kasi nakakapag-venture lang sila outside during user research eh. Pag
Mm-mm.
sometimes they we let them, especially pre-pandemic, let them go outside, find something na gusto nila, yung problem na gusto nilang i-solve. And siguro, at the start of the course, yun, isa din sa ini-introduce namin na HCI nga is such a broad topic, and the areas that they can explore then after taking the course. Siguro just ano lang, para ma-awaken lang yung curiosity nila on exploring. Pero yung during the semester itself, pinaka-exposure lang nila is yung during research time lang.
Mm-mm. I see. Sige. So, this is my final question to the panel, which is going to close our seminar for today. So, my final question to the panel is this one. Given na yung HCI course natin is within a CS department. Tama? Within CS department. So, there's only one HCI course typically in the CS curriculum. So, how else can we improve HCI education in the Philippines given na currently isa lang yon, or do you think kailangan pa ng mas maraming courses na related sa HCI? Sa tingin nyo, paano pa kaya natin mai-improve yung HCI education in the Philippines?
I have a hot take on this.
Sige.
Hot take talaga. Siguro on my end, medyo mahirap when it comes to like everyone of us here. But I think it should be a major course. Parang meron ng several parang sub-courses na ang ComSci, like major in software engineering, major in human-computer interaction. Kasi if you just put HCI in 1 or 2 courses or in 1 or 2 semesters, mahirap siya. Mahirap siyang gawin. Kasi ang daming to really appreciate HCI in its full context, like how to really properly do HCI with the idea of being it as a practice of like being a user experience researcher or designer in a company. So parang practical or application wise, or if you're going for research wise na publishing papers or doing a lot of stuff, kailangan talaga interdisciplinary. You need to go first to have proper yung kunyari sa psychology, especially for us, we have Psikolohiyang Filipino. We have a different psychology aside from the Western psychology. So you need to know yung how Filipinos behave when it comes to the whole experience of creating computer interventions for their tasks. Yun pa lang, isang subject na siya. Tas subject din yung the interface design, and hindi lang yung design of display interfaces. You have pwedeng the object interfaces, like tangible interfaces. Mahirap din ituro yung part na if students would want to go for ang tawag dito, yung physical, yung tangible physical objects yung gusto nilang research or projects. There are also different ways to tackle that. So that's something na gusto kong makita in the future as one major discipline alongside like let's say AI or image processing or those kinds of things.
Sige. Maybe we can hear from Beverly next. And then maybe you can add your closing statement na rin.
Okay. For me, agree ako kay Sir TJ na okay siya maging going major. Kasi when I was looking for my master's degree then, yun sana yung gusto kong i-major but di siya available sa Philippines. So, I tried looking for scholarship abroad. Pero due to circumstances, hindi ko siya nakuha last year. So I decided to go for MIT for now. Pero yan din yung gusto kong track talaga na i-take. Kasi yun din yung closest to digital accessibility, yung human-computer interaction. So agree na gusto ko din na makita siya na major dito sa Philippines. Or if di naman siya possible for like 5 years from now, siguro I would appreciate it if yung HCI i-offer siya ng mas maaga. Parang baka merong parang pinaka-intro like pag sa second year. Kasi kami third year students yung kumukuha nun. So baka pwedeng meron silang HCI then from for example second year student sila. Tapos parang medyo mas advanced na yung tinitake nila sa third year. But HCI pa din para lang madagdagan din yung time. And kasi yung tinatanong din kanina kung ano yung parang memorable project. Feeling ko kasi one factor doon dahil di pa nila na-absorb ng sobra yung lessons and yung pinaka-application. So I think mag-i-improve din yung quality ng products na or outputs nila kapag mas mathaba din or mas matagal yung exposure nila dun sa HCI. And ano ba? Closing statement?
Yeah.
Okay. Siguro in teaching HCI, ang dami ko din natutunan today. Super. I would really also love to integrate all of the things that I've learned from my co-panelists here. Yung mga fun stuff, activities and all. Siguro when teaching HCI, what I want to always emphasize is focus on the human factor, on empathy building, really, kasi at the end of the day, we're making products or we're making systems, websites, and other applications for humans. So we really have to focus on that and just make sure to make it fun. Always make it fun for students, and lesson learned ko din yan, I think, ngayon during yung nagkasalita yung mga co-panelists ko na it's important to make it relatable to your students. Come up with fun activities para mas maging interactive din yung learning process. So I think that's it for me.
Right. Thank you very much, Beverly. Sige, maybe we can have Doc Jen next and then last si Austin.
About how we can improve HCI in the country, I think that's a good idea if we make it a major course. Siguro the other thing that we can do is baka we can offer more electives on topics na hindi natin nako-cover in the HCI course. There are a lot of things na that can spring out of HCI. So in Ateneo, an effort to do this is meron ata kaming, if I remember correctly, we have a guided studies, which is a 1-unit course lang on web accessibility. And then Doc Didith Rodrigo, who was my HCI professor before, offered a guided studies on user personas alone. So it goes deep into the process of creating user personas. So perhaps these little things could expose our students more into the concept of designing systems while keeping the users in mind. The other thing is siguro if we can support students in participating in conferences, HCI related conferences, we can encourage them to, paper writing is another skill to learn, as Sir TJ mentioned earlier. But if there are good projects that can be that can be produced to papers and submitted to conferences, and then we support the students' attendance to the conferences, I think that will give them a more perspective into the area of HCI. Final word siguro is thank you again for the opportunity to be in this panel. I did learn a lot as well, and I if it's okay, I would be incorporating some of those new insights into my course design too. And thank you for everyone. I hope you got something from these conversations too. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Doc Jen. Okay, Austin. Final.
About Hi. About improving HCI education in the Philippines, I'm going to be honest, and since I've only taught it once, I don't think I can give a very informed sort of opinion on that matter. However, I do agree with the other my co-panelists here. Um, Even in 14 weeks sa Lasal, and I'm sure the other universities have semestral system, kulang yung time. And like I've only scratched the surface, I feel, with my students. So yeah, I do agree with them. As for final statements, I think that some students still kind of take this subject for granted, and honestly, that was my one of my primary goals. It's to help them realize that, like my co-panelists have said, you to paraphrase, you can design the best algorithms, the best systems, but if the people can't use the system, medyo walang kwenta eh. In the end, it's the people who use the system that will determine if it succeeds or fails. If people actually download your app or use your tangible objects, the users have to be able to use these things. And I hope that yung mindset ng students before and after the delivery of the course changed in that regard, and now they don't take usability HCI for granted, because it's really, they're designing for people, and that's the one thing that people who make solutions have to keep in mind. I learned a lot from listening to my co-panelists. I really enjoy these kinds of events, even if I'm just in the audience. So it's an honor to be invited here as a panelist. So thank you. I really want to integrate, so of course, being the youngest here, I guess, newest in teaching HCI at least. I'm going to be experimenting a little bit more with integrating more sort of techniques that I learned today and from other sources that I'll be exploring in the future. So thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Austin, and thank you very much to our panel again, to TJ, Doc Jen, Beverly, and Austin, for sharing your course designs with us, your challenges, your teaching innovations in your classrooms. And we hope we can have more of these conversations with other HCI instructors in other universities, kasi I feel like this is a helpful exercise for us. We get to learn from each other. We get to discuss our ano ba to? Mga pains pains as instructors, dealing with students, dealing with projects, this online setting, and how much further can we improve HCI education in the Philippines. So for our attendees, for our audience, since course designs kasi yung pinresent to mga panelists natin, I don't think we can easily share it to the attendees kasi IP on university. So but what we can arrange in the future is maybe we can arrange a workshop. If the instructors here are interested, we can arrange a workshop for HCI instructors or CS instructors on how to design your courses for HCI. Kasi if you are still clueless as to how you will design for future offerings, di ba? Maybe our panelists can help the rest, okay, of the instructors in designing courses. Ayun. Sige, so and for the students and industry practitioners who are with us tonight, I hope you also learned a thing or two with the experiences of our panelists here. And maybe some of you might be inspired to teach as well. Ayun. So we have a shortage of HCI instructors too. So maybe this would be a perfect opportunity to make a call. Sige, join us. Okay? Join us in this journey in making HCI a more respected field in the country so that we can improve the systems that we use even locally. Ayun. So maraming salamat po ulit. If you are interested to attend some of our future events, workshops, seminars like this one, I sent the link to our website, yung join. So https://sigchimnl.org/join. So please sign up. Beverly, Doc Jen, if you are not still a member, so I encourage you to join us. And once you join, you will have access actually, kahit hindi kayo member ng ACM, you will get parang parang newsletters about the most recent researches in HCI, ganyan. So at least you get to be updated, okay, with these different papers. Meron tayo proper CHI in most of mobile application is a global issue. Agree? Okay. Sige. So thank you very much to everyone. Maybe before we leave the session, can we have like a photo, group photo? Ayan. Very typical na to with Philippine events. Let's have a quick group photo. So for those of you sa audience, please join us. Sige. So ayan. So kung pwede nyong i-turn on ang inyong mga camera. Okay. And then, syempre, pag nag-turn on tayo ng camera, hopefully may consent na yun to allow us to post it in our social media accounts. So we will post it in FB, in our Twitter accounts. Ayan, sige. So again, for those who are still with us, I encourage you to open your cameras for a very quick group photo. Ayan. Lalo na po yung mga instructors natin sa session today. We'd like to see your faces para in the future, sana makita rin namin kayo face-to-face. Makapag-workshop man lang tayo. Sige, may hahabol pa kaya? Sige, nakaabang lang ako dito. Sige, maybe we can start the photo, the group photo. Okay, so sige, so I'll count 1, 2, 3. Sige, so 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, sige, isa pa po kasi 2 pages yung Sige, so one more. 1, 2, 3, smile. All right. That's it for today. Thank you everyone for attending. I hope we did not take so much of your time. Nag-overtime na rin tayo. And see you in our next event. Bye-bye. Thank you to Doc Jen, Beverly, Austin, TJ, thank you. Ayan.
Thank you, everyone.
Hope to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.